Okay, so it's important to talk about the economy because the colonial economy really dictates how the colonies develop, right? Um, what's the famous proverb? The love of money is
The root
the root of all evil, right? And so we see by looking at how the economy was structured, um, that it's really this love of money that sets up how people in different parts of the colonies make their lives, um, and why one set of colonies has more slavery than other parts of the colonies. So we're really, I mean, okay, kind of going through this basically. What do you think? When the colonies were first set up, are we going to be more agriculture or more industrious?
agriculture.
Yeah, we're going to be more agriculturally based. But even saying that, the types of agriculture practiced in Boston are going to be different than the types of agriculture practiced in South Carolina. Okay. Um, so one of them is going to be subsistence farming, where you're just farming enough to get by. And the other is going to be cash crop farming. Which one do you think is more profitable?
Cash crop.
Cash crop. Okay. Subsistence farming is essentially just farming to eat. Um, and so if you want to make money, but your soil can only handle subsistence farming, you have to look to other ways in the economy to uh, to make that money. Okay. So starting off with the New England colony, what's the weather like in New England?
Isn't it cold there?
It is cold. Um, do they get more sunlight or less sunlight than a place like Florida?
Less.
They get less, right? Just from the where they are on the globe. Okay, they're going to have in the wintertime they're going to have shorter days. Okay, um, and they're going to have longer winters. And do plants like the cold?
No.
No, right? How many of y'all like whenever it gets freezing, whenever there's a chance of freezing in Houston? How many of y'all help your parents go out and put sheets over certain plants?
Yes, it's very frustrating.
It is, right? But that's to prevent the plants from freezing. They don't like the cold, right?
We let them die.
Huh? You just let them die?
Yes. We're too lazy to do that. So
Never trust your plant to jam.
you can replant them. They'll be fine.
They'll be dead. And you'll get a new plant.
Yeah.
Okay. So you can't say that they'll be fine. Because the one that you started off with is dead. You replace it with a new one.
Well, I don't know anything about them, so it's
okay. All right. So New England, because they tried agriculture, but they really had poor soil. Their soil was more rocky, which makes it hard to plow and to farm. And then they had really long winters. And as we just said, plants don't like the winter, don't like the cold. And so all that kind of grew into developed really poor farming. Okay. So the most of the farming that was done in this area was that subsistence farming. And if you're just doing subsistence farming, where do you think you're going to get your labor from?
Slaves.
Not slaves, because economically back then, slaves were expensive. And if your farming is just enough to feed your family and maybe have a little bit more left over. You don't necessarily want to have slaves, which would be more people to feed. So where do you think you're going to get your labor?
Child labor.
Yeah, your family. It's really not, it's not called child labor, it's called chores, right? So part of your chores, if you were on a farm in New England, would be farm work. And the more kids you had, the more workers you had, right? So that's essentially where they got their labor from. And it was an all-encompassing family deal. Both husbands and wives would work the farm together. Their children would work the farm together. It was pretty big. So since farming wasn't a huge way of life, what type of work do you think took hold in New England?
Industry.
Industry was more prevalent in the New England area, right? One of the things that was needed for industry back then was rivers and streams. Rivers did two things. One, transportation, and two, it provided power. Have y'all seen water mills before? Or not water mills, sorry, water wheels.
Wait, are those ones like when it's like, it looks like a huge Ferris wheel kind of?
Uh-huh.
It just spins and I'll have water?
Yeah, well, what causes it to spin?
Water?
The flow of the river.
The flow of the river. Like, so you have a fin, each of those wheels, it's wide, okay? And they have a fin that goes across the sides of the wheel. And this fin, when it gets in the water's flowing, it's gonna push it and it's gonna go around. And so this water continuously pushes all of these fins in the wheel, causing the wheel to spin. Now, these water wheels would be connected to it would be connected to machinery inside the factory, okay? And so these water wheels would be used to provide power to the factory prior to the development of electricity, okay? So industry will take hold in New England because the farming, which was the first choice, isn't really good. Okay. They also did a lot of timber, okay, a lot of logging. They would do, and they would use the timber to build ships for the British Navy. They did fishing, and they also did whaling. They would go out and kill whales. Why do you think they would kill whales?
For the blubber.
Why?
Because it's warm.
Okay,
It
they're not going to be walking around wearing blubber.
And for food.
Some for food, but you're right. They would take the blubber, and they would take what is blubber?
Fat.
Basically rubber. You
No.
can make
Oh.
rubber from it.
No, you can't make rubber from it. It's blubber is fat. Okay,
Oh, I was right.
it is fat. But what they would do is they would melt down the blubber and change it from fat to oil, to a liquid oil. And so they would burn oil in lamps and things like that. Okay. The whaling industry in North America, in New England, would develop to a point where we almost caused the extinction of several species of whales. But a new industry, by the time that we almost caused extinction, a new industry developed when we discovered oil, right? The black gold, oil. And then we developed kerosene. And so the kerosene took the replaced whale oil, which was Good for the whales. Yay, we're not killing them anymore. All right. So that was the New England colonies. As we move south, you'll notice a change with the soil. What do you think? Does the soil become better or worse as you move south?
Better.
Better, right? And so farms were larger than the New England farms because they had better soil. And is it a little warmer as you move south? Yeah, and so they had better climate too. Okay, so New York and Pennsylvania, they would grow cash crops, okay, to send back. And so because they grew cash crops, was slavery more likely to be in New York or Pennsylvania? It was at the beginning of the colonies. Later on, though, Pennsylvania, because of which group would become an anti-slavery place?
Quakers.
The Quakers. Yeah. The Quakers in Pennsylvania would kind of lead an anti-slavery movement. And same with New York. In fact, if you go to Rochester, New York, you will find the home of Susan B. Anthony. She was a woman who fought for both the women's right to vote, but also she was an abolitionist. Okay. She worked with Frederick Douglass, who's also from Rochester, New York. Well, I mean, he made his home in Rochester to be an anti-slavery abolitionist. All right. So in the middle colonies, they got a little bit of the best of both worlds, right? They had some agriculture, but they also had a lot of rivers that provided a great place for both ports and water power. Okay. So cities like New York and Philadelphia became really busy ports because of their development. So there were industries. What was a big industry in the middle colonies?
Can you repeat that?
Sure. What was one of the big industries in the middle colonies? One, it would start with a T.
Pollution.
That does not start with a T.
Trash.
Nope. These are things that you would make money from.
Oh.
What is it, tobacco?
People.
Textiles. Anybody know what a textile is? When I was y'all's age, I didn't. Tara, what's a textile?
Oh, I meant I heard of it. I don't know how to.
All right. So whenever your book says textile, just say, hey, that's a fancy word for cloth. That's all it is. Textiles are cloth. Sorry, just got a Google Classroom. Okay. All right, sorry guys. So things like these industries were perfectly situated in the middle colonies because the ports essentially helped raw materials would come in from the southern colonies, get processed in the middle colonies, and then be shipped to England or other parts of the colonies. Okay, so they were kind of the middlemen in this. And lastly, we get to these southern colonies. So these farms are gonna be what? Do you think they're gonna be larger than the middle colonies?
Yes.
Yeah. So these farms are gonna be built really big, and really big farms are essentially called plantations, okay? Because they had really rich soil and a really mild climate that was great for farming. It meant a long growing season, okay? So a plantation is essentially a large farm that is operated for profit, to maximize profit. Okay. They did cash crops such as back then. What were some of the big cash crops?
Tobacco.
Tobacco,
Rice.
rice. Okay, both of those were pretty big cash crops. Problem with both of them is that they require a lot of labor. Okay, and tobacco. Oh my goodness, we obviously any type of slavery is horrible. But if you were a slave on a tobacco farm, that was like even worse because you can just touching the tobacco leaves, you can get the nicotine into your system by touching tobacco leaves, right? So if you're there, you were essentially waist high in nicotine every day. Okay. So the southern colonies, because they're operating for profit, for the love of money, they are getting their labor from enslaved Africans. Okay. And so England would get these raw materials, and if they weren't shipped up to the middle colonies, they were shipped back to England to be processed there. Which is why a lot of these plantations were located near the coast. Because if you're growing stuff that's going to be shipped to England, do you want to be near the boats? Yeah, you want to be near the boats. Okay. The further away you got, the farmland was not as rich, but it was still good enough for them to say, hey, we're going to operate with slavery in this area. And that would be the backcountry. So the colonies started to produce so much tobacco, they crashed the tobacco system in England. Okay. So here is our basic economic supply and demand graph. Okay. And so this y-axis is price, and this x-axis is quantity. Okay, so you can see here, what do you think would happen to the, and the point where supply and demand cross, that's the market price. Okay, so what do you think would happen to the market price if the demand for a product decreased and moved to the left? Moved this way. What would happen to the price if the demand decreased?
So with the price,
Yeah, what would happen to the price?
wouldn't the price decrease as well?
Price would decrease as well. Because if you can imagine this red line moving to the left, the blue line is staying the same. Isn't the price falling along the blue line? Right? And if demand for a product increased, what would happen to the price?
The price would increase as well.
Price would increase as well. Okay. Think about the Nintendo Switch. Okay. I saw Mikey's eyes get big, like, oh, yeah. Okay. Pre-pandemic, Nintendo Switch was pretty popular, right? When the pandemic first hit, did the Nintendo Switch grow or lose popularity?
It grew.
It grew, right? It was sold out everywhere. So if you wanted to buy a Nintendo Switch, what was going to happen to the price that you would have to pay in order to get one?
It would increase.
It increased, right? Let's say you bought one for $400 pre-pandemic. Is that about the price that people paid for a Nintendo Switch pre-pandemic? How much was a Nintendo Switch before the pandemic?
It was like $200 and some dollars.
Okay, 200. When the pandemic hit, how much, if you wanted to go out and buy a Nintendo Switch today, how much would you be able to find one for?
Like 300 maybe.
I've seen them for 500. I've seen them for $500. Okay. So in economics, we say what has happened is the demand has increased a lot. Okay. So the price increases. Now, supply works kind of the same way. If this blue line moved to the left, what would happen to the price? So if it moves to the left, we say that the supply is decreasing. So if this blue line moves to the left, what's happening to the price? If the supply decreases, what happens to the price?
So the price would go up because more people are trying to grasp at it. So.
Well, demand's not changing, right?
Oh yeah, true.
It's not more people are trying to grasp at it, but what's happening to the availability of the
It's becoming smaller and smaller.
Yeah, it's becoming smaller and smaller. And so because the availability is falling, the price is increasing. What would happen if the supply curve shifted to the right, if it increased? What would happen if the supply increased?
The price would go lower?
Yeah, the price would drop. The price would fall, okay? So if we increase supply and demand stays the same, the price is going to fall, all right? So let's bring that to tobacco, okay? The plantations in the South produced so much tobacco and they shipped it all to England. What happened? Did them producing a lot of tobacco, did that change the demand for tobacco or did it change the supply?
It changed the demand for tobacco.
By growing a lot of it?
Yeah, because they had some, wait. No, it changed the supply.
It did change the supply. And so what happened to the price?
It went down.
The price fell, okay? Supply in economic, for my seniors, supply economics is harder to grasp than demand, okay? But if you can understand that when they produce so much tobacco, the price fell, you're a step ahead of them. And it's just across everybody, it's easier to understand demand than it is to understand supply because we're consumers and so we demand a lot, okay? But yeah, so the price fell, and because the price fell, it just kind of collapsed tobacco. And so people in the South were not able to sell their tobacco at as high of a price. Okay. So if you go to New York City and go to the United Nations building in New York, you will find these pictures or these monuments to the slave trade. Okay. Now, slavery existed in Africa before the Europeans arrived, but the way slavery was in Africa is different than the way slavery was in the Americas. In Africa, when tribes went to war with one another, the winning side would often take slaves, but they would kind of bring them in as somewhat of their family. Okay. If you lost, you could become a slave to a tribe in Africa, but you were then part of that tribe. Okay. There was no necessarily like mistreatment, and your kids were not considered slaves. Your kids were considered part of the victorious tribe. And so the idea behind this was to grow your numbers, to grow the numbers of your tribe. Okay. Now, when Europeans, and which country was the first country to start trading for slavery and for enslaved Africans? Talk about it in lesson 3.
Wait, wasn't it Portugal?
Yes, it was Portugal. Okay. They were the first Europeans, but they would not be the last. So Europeans increased the demand for slavery because they would say, hey, we're going to come over and we will trade you guns and other things for enslaved people. And the first people in Africa that that opened up this trade with Europeans, they may have thought that the slavery that they were selling people into was going to be similar to the way they had practiced slavery. But later on, it became a thing about greed. Because as Europeans wanted more and more slaves, they would come over to Western Africa and say, hey, we need more slaves. We're willing to trade you these guns. And these guns help people in Africa maintain power. And so these groups of people that would trade with the Europeans, they would get the guns, and now they would be motivated to go to war with other people in Africa, to capture more people, to sell them for more guns and for more manufactured goods and this thing. So again, the love of money, the root of all evil. Okay. And it really doesn't matter what part of the world you're in, Europe, Africa, Asia, the Americas, this truth remains constant, that the love of money is the root of all evil. Okay. And so this would develop into the Middle Passage. Now it's a little hard to see. These are the engravings of that monument. But essentially these slave ships, this is the leg of the journey called the Middle Passage from Africa to the Americas. It was the worst possible leg of the triangular trade. And it's a triangular trade because it's going Africa, Americas, Europe, Africa, Americas, Europe. Okay, so it's kind of forming this triangle here. But imagine people are crammed shoulder to shoulder in a ship lying down like this. And the ships are trying to cram as many people into their ship as they can, because more people that they can sell to plantations in the Americas means more money for them. Okay. If you had to go to the bathroom, there was no place for you to go. You just went where you were. So these ships stunk. And there's also layers of people. So if you were at the bottom layer, everything from the top layer of people would slowly work its way down to you. Okay? It was horrible. these ships would also try to minimize the amount of water and food that they would have on board, because they didn't want to just give food to like overfeed, right? They're trying. So what do you think would happen if the ship captain underestimated the amount of food that they needed for the journey? First off, how many months would it take about from Africa to the New World? About how many months?
2 to 3.
2 to 3. Yeah. So what do you think would happen if the ship captain underestimated the amount of food needed for that journey?
Some people just wouldn't eat.
Okay, they may not eat. Now, if you're not going to eat, are you going to get pretty cranky?
Yes.
Yeah, and you may start causing some trouble on ship. Sometimes what they would do is they would throw people overboard. So they had people chained up. They would take one end of the chain and tie it to a rock or cannonball, and throw that cannonball overboard, letting it drag people overboard into the ocean and drowning them. Pretty horrific. Okay. I'm sure y'all seen the movie Black Panther, right? Okay. Do y'all remember what Michael P. Jordan's character says at the end of the movie when he essentially, what does he essentially do?
Die.
How? By his own choice? Yeah, it's essentially by his own choice, and he makes a statement that he would rather die than go to prison or because he saw that as slavery, and he references the Middle Passage and how some of these people would choose to throw themselves overboard, to die by their own choice than to live a life of slavery. But the Middle Passage was horrific, and it's just really it's a really hard thing to think about, and it all comes back down to that money, love of money. Okay. So there's the triangular trade coming from Africa, so from Europe to Africa to the Caribbean back to Europe. This would be the triangular trade. Morgan, I'm not sure. There may be in different parts, but I am not certain of where. Morgan asked if there was an underwater statue of the slaves, kind of paying homage, paying tribute, remembering those who were lost at sea. Where is that, Morgan? You're showing a picture.
I don't know where it is. It's just somewhere.
Okay, well, see if you can figure out where it is. All right. So life under slavery, we know it wasn't, conditions were pretty poor. One of the things that you will hear, and we'll end here today on this one, but on this slide. But one of the things that you will often hear today from people who say, who are trying to justify the actions of their ancestors, is that there were some slave owners that were good slave owners. How many of y'all have heard that before? That heard some people say that not all slave owners were bad. Have y'all heard that? Oh, okay. Yeah, the more you talk with people, the more you'll hear that that not all slave owners were bad, or they will pose this question: if slaves were property, uh, you know, wouldn't you want to take care of your property? And thing is, they weren't taken care of, and part of the reason slaves, for the most part, were not taken care of. First off, even if they were taken care of, does that make it right? No. So it's kind of silly to for someone to say, well, you know, some slaves were well taken care of. No, it doesn't change that it was a wrong practice, even if true. But it wasn't true, right? So they weren't oftentimes slaves were not taken care of, one, to break the individual spirit of the person, but two, they were seen as an asset. And you want a greater return on your investment. You don't want to put a lot of expenses into it, because more expenses means less profit. And so the idea here was, let's give, you know, in the southern plantations, let's have the enslaved people work with as little as possible to still be productive, so we can maximize our profit. Okay. The southern colonies also had slave codes, specific laws that governed the behavior of enslaved people. If you were leaving the plantation to go to another plantation, enslaved people often had to carry a paper pass with them, kind of like a hall pass, permission that they had to leave. If they did not have that paper pass, they were seen as possibly running away. Okay. So a lot of people in the colonies didn't necessarily approve of this. They opposed slavery on religious grounds. Okay. You know, Pennsylvania, we had the Quakers and the Mennonites. We still know the Mennonites today, right? How many of y'all have heard of Mennonite? They're like the Amish. Okay, the Amish today would be the Mennonites. So if you watch The Office, think of Dwight Schrute's family. Okay, they would be closer to Mennonites. Okay, and so the abolitionist movement obviously begins north of the Mason-Dixon line. Okay, Pennsylvania, where one, slavery is not very prominent, and two, you have that religious deal. All right, guys. So colonial government will. I'm going to have a couple. There's going to be a worksheet that is posted later today. Okay, for y'all to go through, and it will walk you through this lesson too. Okay. Cool. All right, guys. I will see y'all later. Oh, Morgan, in Grenada. Okay. So that would be the Caribbean, right? If I remember correctly, Grenada, Caribbean. All right. All right, guys. Well, I will see y'all on Wednesday.
Bye.
Bye.